Hi, I'm Femi OK. South African President Jacob Zuma's political future is uncertain after days of negotiations between him and the country's ruling African National Congress. This comes more than a year before his second term is due to expire.
Today we discuss what Zuma's possible departure means for both the future of the ANC and South Africa's political landscape. I'm Malika Bilal, and you're now in the stream, live on Al Jazeera and YouTube.
And be sure to send us your questions and your comments. I know you have a lot to say, and we will try and get it into this show.
I am Jay Naidu. I am a political and social activist and a former cabinet minister in Nelson Mandela's cabinet. I am in the AJ stream.
President Zuma has been at the centre of several scandals since he first took office back in 2009. Although he faces more than 700 charges linked to allegations of bribery and corruption, Zuma denies any wrongdoing and maintains support among a segment of the ANC. But his scandals have been considered by others in the party to be a political liability ahead of next year's general election. Amid mounting pressure from within the party and protests demanding Zuma must go, ANC officials led by South African Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa met with Zuma on Monday to discuss his fate. Al Jazeera correspondent Famida Miller reports from Johannesburg.
Well, this meeting's been going on for a couple of hours now, and the expectation is that the National Executive Committee will come out to push Jacob Zuma to resign. All indications so far is that he's resisted that, and that's even through talks with the president of the ANC, Cyril Ramaphosa, over the last few days, where they were trying to come to some sort of solution, some sort of exit plan to get Jacob Zuma out. It seems that those talks collapsed. There were a number of demands from Jacob Zuma, which the ANC as a party, even though the governing party can't necessarily meet around indemnity around prosecution related to these corruption charges, and even the state covering the cost of legal fees as well as security for his family. Now, these are reports around what the president may have wanted. He's not stepped down yet. And so the expectation is that this NEC meeting does come out with a decisive plan and a push for Jacob Zuma to step down from office.
So Famida will continue to report out that story. You can follow her on Twitter, Famida Miller.
So what will be Jacob Zuma's legacy, and what are the ramifications of a resignation? Well, here to help us unpack this story in Johannesburg, Ridi Tlabi is a talk show host. Tasneem Isap is a researcher at the Society Work and Development Institute at Wits University. And Kumi Naidu is the chair of Africans Rising. That's a Pan-African movement of social justice activists and civil service organizations. Welcome everyone to the stream. I want to get started with our community, pretty active on this topic and for a while now. This is Dibo Lelo, who writes in, "We've basically been kept in the dark. It feels like a whole lot of tiptoeing around Zuma when he should just be booted out. No negotiation should be held with a thief." She goes on to say, "We've been told to respect the process and wait. At some point, they have to bite the bullet and make a decision. Madiba's hard work," referring to Nelson Mandela there, "has crumbled in just a few years. It saddens us as a nation as we sit around and just wait." Ridi, what do you make of her comments on just waiting? Can you relate to that?
Well, it is absolutely apt. I mean, everything that is said in that tweet is so appropriate and a true reflection of the situation. The fact of the matter is that we are being thanked, and I'm not making this up, the deputy president, who is the president of the ANC, Cyril Ramaphosa, posted a tweet yesterday where he thanked South Africans for their patience. And I thought, nobody is patient. This has been dragging on for a very long time. And secondly, it is quite jarring to learn that the ANC thinks this is its own private internal matter. It isn't. It is about the country, and they have not taken us into their confidence. So I think there is a failure and a vacuum of leadership. So yes, we are waiting.
I want to just share this with you. This comes from the HuffPost South Africa. Have a listen.
Zuma must fall. 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 Zuma must fall.
So you hear that, Kumi, you hear the vuvuzela there in the background as well, the enthusiasm from the crowd. If we took a temperature of the mood in South Africa right now, what would it be? How would you describe it?
Well, in September, opinion polls were already saying that 7 out of 10 South Africans as a whole were wanting President Zuma to step down immediately. And within the ANC, in September, it was already 6 out of 10. So right now, following the ANC National Conference with the new ANC President and Cyril Ramaphosa and so on, I think that right now the mood has shifted way in antagonism to President Zuma. And right now, I think his behavior confirms his presidency, where he's put himself before the ANC, he's put himself before the country, he's put himself before the people. And the way he's handled this without no dignity, no sense of decorum and so on.
Can you give us an example of that? Because you're sitting there in South Africa, so you're seeing it almost play by play. Lack of dignity, explain, give us an example.
So, for example, President Zuma always maintained with regard to the corruption charges against him in the early days, he said, I want my day in court, I want my day in court. And once the legal system started bringing charges against him, multiple cases, he has done everything possible to actually delay facing those charges. And sadly, it's been at the cost of South African taxpayers. So right now, I would say that he does have pockets of support. It's waning, it's declining quite heavily. But it's important in the way we discuss this is to actually just acknowledge that most South Africans recognize that while the fish rots from its head, as they say, and we have to remove President Zuma, none of us are naive enough to believe that just removing President Zuma is going to sort out the decay, the corruption, the absolute disrespect of our people at multiple levels. And we need not just Jacob Zuma to go, we need the ANC to go back to its roots, to understand they are servants of the people and stop acting like kings and queens, as many of the leadership have been doing.
So, Kumi, you mentioned decades.
Can I just add another example
Go ahead.
that is relevant to your question? You've just said, what are the other examples of Zuma being selfish, having disregard for the people and putting himself first? Well, the big scandal was taxpayers' money, state coffers, about 245 million South African rands, which is about 22 million US dollars, used for refurbishments at his private residence. The public protector, who's tasked with investigating such miscarriage of justice and misuse of public funds, that Zuma had broken the law, but he held on. It dragged on for 2 years. He wouldn't concede that he was wrong. He wouldn't pay back the money until he was embarrassed in Parliament, and until the matter went to the highest court in the land, the Constitutional Court, which found that Zuma had violated and failed to defend the Constitution. So that's a perfect example of somebody who was in it for himself. But I will back up what Kumi is saying, that even in that incident, the ANC would not turn its back on Jacob Zuma. They supported him. They humiliated the previous public protector. She's left office now. They literally disregarded the South African public and showed us the middle finger. So that's why Kumi is saying this is not just about Jacob Zuma, but the entire ANC. And I bet that's why they're battling to get rid of him, because they too have been complicit in this decay.
So really, though, it begs the question, and to your point, and also to Kumi's, why exactly now? So I want to read 2 tweets. One is someone referencing what you mentioned, and something we've also covered here on the show. Junaid says, we paid $246 million on his home. He clearly lied about what his role in these huge amounts were. This resulted in him having to pay back a small part of the money. He was also found guilty of breaking the Constitution. We don't deserve a president like that. But Nafizi here points out something that a lot of people are pointing out. He says, Jacob Zuma has survived impeachment moves in the past. He's known, of course, some call him Teflon Don. But I doubt if he's going to survive this mass action. Tasneem, he has survived in the past. Why do you think now might be different? Why do you think people like Nafizi are saying this might make all the difference?
Well, he has survived many votes of no confidence and, other, public trials in the last few years. But why he is up really on the chopping block this time, and it's different, is that there was a really significant event that happened in December, and that was the ANC's National Elective Conference. So the African National Congress went to a conference and elected a new leadership, and Zuma and his preferred candidate and his faction's preferred candidate effectively lost the presidency at that conference. And that put him in a very precarious position because the incoming president, well, now the president of the ANC, Cyril Ramaphosa, has been going against Zuma quite a lot in the last few months. So this is what has shifted. And ultimately, the December conference shifted the political sands in the ANC and then shifted the political mood in the country around Zuma and his presidency.
Is it too soon, guest, to talk about legacy? What did Zuma do for South Africa? Kumi?
It's not too soon. We've got enough.
And Reedy and Tasneem, but let's start with Kumi. I gather it's not too soon.
No, it's not too soon. His legacy was written almost before he came into power. He was complicit in corruption. He has, his legacy is corruption, corruption, corruption. There were certain good things that he did, but that could have happened without him. It wasn't particularly inspiring. For example, he's held back, because of corruption, he's held back progress. So, for example, on energy, he's insisted in driving forward a corrupt nuclear deal with Russia. And notwithstanding every sector of society opposing it, including the majority in the ANC, because his son stands to benefit from the nuclear deal. So I think the legacy will be that he destroyed a lot of what Mandela built in terms of the image and the status. I mean, myself as a young 15-year-old ANC activist from that age, it is deeply distressing to see a movement that many of us gave our lives to, many people gave everything to, that is being destroyed. So for me, Jacob Zuma, within a couple of years in power, his legacy was that of corruption, manipulation, lies, and abuse of the trust of the people of South Africa.
Tasneem, let me play this for you. It comes from the Pretoria Bureau Chief of the African News Agency. It was posted yesterday, but at the very end of the bite, there's something that I want to ask you about. Let's have a listen.
And we're calling to everybody that please, fellow South Africans, do not go to work tomorrow. Tomorrow, in all 9 provinces, please don't go to work. Whether you're a police, whether you're a nurse, whether you're a doctor, whether you're a security guard, whether you're a garden boy, whether you work in a border gate, do not go to work. Because this crisis that we are facing, it affects us. This man is like Mugabe in South Africa.
This man is like Mugabe. Tasneem.
So, I think there are some significant differences between the situation in Zimbabwe and Mugabe and what's happening in South Africa under Zuma. I think for me, it's a stretch to make that comparison, and I would have to see how one makes it. But it's something that I've heard a lot, and it's something that a lot of people say, Zuma is trying to be like Mugabe and so on. I think it needs a bit of reflection. I think we need to really think about what the real, comparison is there. A comparison, though, that, Kumi kind of brought up was that of Mandela's ANC and Mandela's government versus Zuma's ANC and Zuma's government. And perhaps I'm not as optimistic as my other colleagues about, the early 1990s in South Africa. But I've heard this comparison too, and many people have said that Cyril Ramaphosa and the new ANC will be going back to a kind of Mandela ANC. And I think that's also something that we need to press on, that we need to critique the idea of where the Mandela ANC in government got us, and, what we need now, given that the context is different. So I think we need to also criticize those kind of easy comparisons, Mandela's ANC, Zuma's ANC. I see the significant points where we can talk about how Mandela's tenure as state president was positive for the country, but I think we also need to be critical of that and that comparison. Similarly to the comparison of Mugabe and Zuma.
Kumi, I wanted to bring this up because it's mentioning something that you referenced earlier. It's very similar, but Tong on Twitter says, when I joined the ANC in 1989, it was a movement that wanted to give a better life for all the people who live in South Africa. The party now is beyond redemption and should just exit the political scene. The ANC has become synonymous with corruption. On the other side of that coin, though, we got this comment. Very few and far between are comments like this on our Twitter feed. But she writes in, my president has done lots of things. Look at the schools and universities. Kumi, are there any redeemable qualities from the legacy, when you look back at the legacy of Zuma, that you can find?
I think that the most important intervention that he made was he did the right thing on HIV/AIDS and did expand the antiretroviral programs. But I think the credit for that needs to go to the Treatment Action Campaign and civil society rather than to Zuma himself. But I think that what Tasneem says is really important, because we must be very clear that the rot, because why was Zuma able to get away with what he has done over the last 10 years? It couldn't be that it just suddenly happened, he came into power. The rot started a long time ago, and I just want to be clear, I don't want to romanticize the Mandela years, which was only 5 years in power. I was really talking about Mandela as the leader of the ANC, as the liberation movement more so. But it's, much as many of us had criticisms of very, range of different things on land reform, on economic transformation and so on, and the pace of it under Mandela, I think when we look at where Zuma has taken us today, that period under Mandela would be still a golden period. But people must be clear. Removing Zuma is the first step. Then it's a question of cleaning up the National Executive Committee that also has a whole bunch of corrupt, powerful people in it. And then it's a question of the ANC humbling itself and going back and listening to people. But just to be clear on that tweet about has the ANC outlived its value, I think there are many people that believe that right now. The test is going to be whether the ANC does well in 2019 elections, is whether in fact the ANC shows consistent, passionate, urgent attention to eradicating corruption in our state-owned enterprises, in institutions across the board. And if the ANC does things like try and shelter people in the Zuma camp who have been implicated by corruption and treat them with one set of rules and treat the rest of the South African people differently, then the ANC is dead, politically speaking, moving forward. Yes, it might still be the major party in the next election, but if the current ANC leadership doesn't decisively address corruption, ensures that Zuma ends up in prison, and all the ANC leadership needs to do is allow our justice system, which has been working. I think the one thing we all pray and say, thank God for the courts in our country, and I pay tribute to the judiciary and civil society for their role they've played so far.
I want to share with you a headline that Rudy came up with, and we were just chatting just before the show. I said, what was your headline for where South Africa is right now? Rudy, share it with us. Your headline. It's Rudy's headline. Rudy's headline. Take this one out because we're not ready for that one yet. Ready, I want you to write the headline. Where are we right now?
Okay, so I really do think that Jacob Zuma is the cat with 10 lives, because if he was just a cat with 9 lives, he would have exhausted them all by now. How does somebody who is so scandal prone, who's facing multiple charges of fraud, racketeering and corruption, which had never dissipated throughout his presidency, who has made one constitutional blunder after another? What do I mean by that, Femi? I mean that every time Zuma and the presidency and the government have been taken to court, most times they lose those cases in court, including when he was trying to challenge the public protector's report that he should pay back the money that was used to refurbish his home. So I really do think that Jacob Zuma still has some cards to play, and the reason he has some cards to play goes back to what Kumi was saying, that some of his ministers have been complicit in the corruption. Some of them are tainted. Some of the members of the ANC are tainted. So they can't just turn around and say, dude, your time is up. They too have a case to answer. And I must say that clip that you played earlier and asked Tasneem what she makes of the ANC members asking us all to not go to work, to shut down the country. I mean, I'm exasperated by that nonsense, because civil society for years has been saying Jacob Zuma is flawed, and the ANC is also disrespecting the constitution by continuously protecting him. And now at the 11th hour, they want us to shut the country down. Well, we did try for a couple of months. We did try for a couple of years as Jacob Zuma took us from one scandal to another. It was the ANC that was there holding his hand, protecting him. So now they're coming to the party. It is too little, too late, I'm afraid.
So I wanted to give one. One nuanced perspective on this, looking back. Some of the good and some of the bad. This person says, looking at the legacy. This is Thomas. He is a law student in Pretoria, and this is what he told the stream.
The way young people participate in political dynamics has completely changed. We see this in the rise of student-led movements such as Fees Must Fall, and they show that during the Zuma years, radical action was demanded, and when it wasn't provided by the government, young people took it into their own hands. However, an insidious theme that has emerged through these years is a complete mistrust for authority, and essentially the entire system, which most young South Africans believe to be inherently broken. In contrast, it's also been a period where young South African voices were amplified in a way that they have never been before. It's been a time where most young people have become more legislatively and politically aware. And in a sense, this has given our once superficial democracy a kind of depth.
So Tasneem, he mentions a distrust for authority, but also seeing the light in all of that, the good part of that. What do you make of that?
You know, it's interesting that he talked about the Fees Must Fall movement and other kind of popular mobilizations that have happened in the country under Zuma's presidency. And certainly what we've seen is a huge student movement, yes, but also massive community protests, across the country, happening almost on a weekly, some would say an even daily basis, various small mobilizations in communities around the country that relate to various issues, local issues. But it all links into bigger politics. And what I will say about this is that while we've seen all of that and we've seen these massive kind of mobilizations across the country, we also haven't seen a huge popular mobilization, popular protest against Zuma. There have been attempts, but I'm also critical of these attempts. So there was a Zuma Must Fall movement. That movement didn't manage to gain the kind of support that many thought it would. There were a number of criticisms around that. Even now, in the wake of all of this uncertainty that's happening, and supposedly many people saying that most people in the country want Zuma to go, we still haven't seen South Africans really taking to the streets. And
Tasneem,
this
why?
is odd because
Tasneem,
we
why?
are in a country.
Tasneem, why?
Why? So, I mean, that's the real question, right? For me, at least, is that in a country where we see so much protest, why haven't we had a big popular protest around Zuma leaving? And that really is a question that I think we have to collectively answer. Perhaps it's because South Africans believe that the ANC will be able to resolve this issue. Perhaps it's because there is a fundamental distrust for the system and that people believe that you can't get rid of someone like Zuma. Perhaps still it's because there isn't
so
as
many
much...
answers, Tasneem. It's like maybe all of the above, really. What do you think?
Sure, exactly.
I disagree with Tasneem. The Zuma Must Fall marches that happened in April were unprecedented. Never have South Africans in post-democratic South Africa marched against a sitting president. And they cut across. I was at one of the biggest to the union buildings. There were attempts prior to that main event. And that's why I say it was a success. It cut across racial lines and class lines. I think what has happened is that the criticisms have been amplified, but in my view, it doesn't in any way diminish the fact that this was an unprecedented move. And what was the criticism? Well, the criticism was that white people in South Africa never march. They only march when their comfort is disturbed and disrupted. The criticism was that we have what we call service delivery protests, and these are protests by poor people who just want basic services like water and electricity, and you don't see white people there. Perhaps that criticism was deserved. There was a very cynical, wow, the white people and the middle class, they're never there when real issues are affecting poor people. And perhaps that is a legitimate criticism. But that movement against Zuma was unprecedented. I would say that it was successful. And also people protest in different ways on social media, columns, radio stations. Certainly the voices are being amplified in a way that they never were in the Mbeki and Mandela years. But
so
from
really,
Mbeki with the
and Tasneem and Kumi, Can you believe that we've been talking about this for half an hour? And I want to show you a headline. This is the headlines from The Guardian. So this meeting has been going all day on Monday. Still no result. Have a look at that headline. I know that none of you will be surprised, and South Africa is being asked for patience. This conversation continues online using the hashtag AJStream. Thanks for watching, everybody. Thank you guys very much indeed. Take care.